Welcome to Lesson 2 on this third module on digital business models. We saw earlier how modern competitive battles are won by attracting developers. Nowhere is this clearer than in the case of mobile platform wars that took place between 2007 with the introduction of Android and 2013 when Android and iOS took over 95% of the mobile phone market. Today, Android and iOS account for 99% of the market for mobile operating systems. But how did we get there? It turns out that iOS and Android emerged out of a landscape of 20 dead platforms. iOS and Android were certainly not the first software platforms that handset makers could use to build mobile phones. Symbian, Brew, S40, Palm OS, Migo, and many more platforms were launched between 1999 and 2010 with a goal to power the next generation of internet-enabled cell phones or smartphones as they're known today. When Android and iPhone OS, now called iOS, launched in 2007, they were the first platforms that were designed to bring the PC paradigm to mobile. That is, allow mobile devices to address eventually millions of different user needs through apps that were built by millions of software developers. Android and iOS were the first platforms that came with an app store and made it possible for any software developer to build and market apps directly to millions of users. Technically speaking, Brew and Danger OS both had app stores and predated Android, but they suffered from cumbersome certification and a small addressable market of users, respectively. What Android and iOS did differently was to build an operating system designed primarily for the needs of developers. Almost everyone else that came before them, including very well-funded initiatives from Palm OS and Symbian, were designed primarily for the needs of handset makers. In the mobile platform wars, only the first movers survived. Microsoft's Windows Phone came in 2012 in the form of the first Nokia phones, a company which Microsoft would later acquire. In 2015, Windows Phone had literally a negligible market share, and Microsoft eventually merged its mobile and desktop divisions. Firefox OS was announced in 2011, and the first phones hit the market in 2013, backed primarily by Telefonica and other mobile operators. Firefox was eventually killed in 2016. BlackBerry had a fragmented platform story supporting Java, BlackBerry, and eventually Android apps, but suffered rapidly declining sales. Today, Android and iOS do not just own the market in terms of device market share. They're also the platforms developers target the most when building apps. The next chart from the State of the Developer Nation Q3 2016, published by Vision Mobile, shows the platforms that developers prioritize across the world. The green bars show the percentage of developers in each region that spend most of their time building Android apps, split between hobbyists and professionals. The black bars show the same analysis for iOS developers. What follows are developers targeting mobile browsers and Windows devices. Clearly, Android is now not just the market share leader for developer popularity, but more importantly, the platform most professional developers prioritize as of Q3 2016. While Android has been ahead of iOS for almost as long as it has existed, that lead has primarily been driven by greater adoption among hobbyists and those building apps as a side project. We now see 79% of those building apps professionally target Android. Contrast that with 61% of professional developers targeting iOS globally. Apple has now two key problems. The first is that the high end of the market is growing slower than the total market, so that their market share is gradually shrinking. The second is that there is a shortage of talent familiar with Apple's platforms to fill professional roles. That is because there are less than half as many hobbyists targeting iOS as Android. To begin to tackle the first problem, Apple took its first real and small step further down market with the iPhone SE. The solution to the second problem is around Swift, Apple's new language, which makes it substantially easier to master than its traditional language of Objective-C. Mobile may be where the importance of apps and developers was popularized. where the "there's an app for that" became part of everyday vocabulary. But apps have existed for at least 2 decades before mobile. For example, developers have been producing desktop apps since the 1990s. Today, 50% of professional developers are still building desktop apps, according to Vision Mobile's State of the Developer Nation Q1 2016. These developers are split between 2 large groups: those building for native Windows versus those who are building for the web browser. Compared to desktop, slightly fewer, that is 42% of all developers, are building mobile apps. Cloud apps, that is, those that are run somewhere in a remote machine in a data center, are the focus for 45% of the professional developers. Today, many types of apps, whether run on a smartphone, a desktop, or another hardware device, will need a backend or a cloud component to store and manage data. The newest domain where developers are active is Internet of Things, which includes things like smart home, for example, smart thermostats or door locks, industrial automation, wearables such as wearable fitness trackers, connected cars, and much more. Overall, Internet of Things, IoT for short, is the area of focus for 19% of professional developers globally. Out of all of the areas under IoT, smart home is by far the most popular, with almost half of all IoT developers being active in that area in the beginning of 2016, according to Vision Mobile data. Note that developers are usually active in several areas at the same time. For example, 59% of desktop developers are also involved in mobile. Next question is, where are developers going next? Augmented reality, the practice of augmenting the physical world with visuals and data, and machine learning, which is the ability for machines to excel at human tasks, are both hyped in the mainstream technology press. Software developers, as the early adopters, are quickly moving to embrace both the learning experiences and commercial opportunities. We find that 23% of developers are already involved in other augmented reality or virtual reality software development. And an amazing 41% of developers are involved in data science or machine learning in some way. In the next lesson, we'll look at the motivations and types of software developers, as well as the revenues they make.